Good morning. Thanks everyone for joining us this morning. It's my pleasure to introduce Joel Graham, who is a professional staff member for the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, for Ranking Member Roger Wicker, where he focuses on civil and commercial space policy, including U.S. space leadership, regulation, and oversight of NASA. As role of the committee, Joel has worked on several space-related legislative initiatives, including the Bipartisan Senate NASA Authorization Acts of 2019-2020, Space Act of 2020, and the NASA Enhanced Use Leasing Extension Acts and space-related provisions of the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. Welcome, Joel.
Thanks. Well, I'll be quick about this. I know I want to leave some time for questions. So just a preview of our committee's activity. We're currently getting ready to conference the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, which includes our NASA Authorization Act in it. We're hopeful that the House will have their bill ready that we can conference and pass a NASA authorization into law as part of that process. That's kind of the top of the plate for us. We are coming up on the enhanced use leasing extension at the end of this year that we're going to have to extend, and we hope to get a long-term extension done as part of the NASA bill. And we're also looking ahead to the FAA reauthorization bill that's coming up in about a year or so. That'll be a huge effort, and I expect that this time we'll probably see some space-related, AST-related provisions in that bill. Obviously, we're coming up on the statutory end of the learning period for commercial human spaceflight. And we're going to have to figure out some things, what to do there. And we're thinking about that, and we're thinking about ways that we can kind of take what the industry has already learned and incorporate that and find out what we have left to learn, or what the industry has left to learn, and incorporate that as well and provide a roadmap to get there. That's the really quick overview of our priorities and our activities. But I'd like to open it up to questions if any of the members have them.
I got a question.
Yes.
On the EUL authorization, if that doesn't make it through this year, is it just assumed that you'll just keep coming back until you get it?
That's right. If we don't get a long-term authorization done in the NASA authorization as part of USECA, we're going to have to do it in some fashion before the end of the year.
Okay.
Thank you all. Space Policy Directive 3 from the previous administration, directed the Office of Space Commerce to take on the space traffic management for all, and it would appear that the current White House's budget request supports that. Comments from the Senate side?
Yeah, no, thanks, Greg. We were really glad to see the Rich's appointment as the Office of Space Commerce, the head of Office of Space Commerce. That's a great development. I think we're looking forward to working with him. It's been a long time coming, getting someone in that role, but I'm glad to see the movement now from Commerce and NOAA in particular. I know Dr. Spinrad has been working on this and has taken this kind of on as a task for himself to work on. We need to pour on the gas here. We need to get moving with that role at Commerce. Standing up the OADR, rolling out on that the program that the appropriators blessed in law as well. And we need to stand, that needs to be stood up. I know they're saying 2024 is an operational date. I feel like that's too far out. This is something that we need a lot sooner than that. So we'll be working with them to see if we can push that up some and get an operational capability in place sooner. And I think, I hope Rich will be a partner in doing that. They're moving. We want to see more being done sooner, but I do appreciate them being partners, and certainly Secretary Raimondo's focus on it as well has been good, and so we're hoping to get some things done quickly there.
Thank you.
Hey Joel, when sorry, go ahead, Terry.
Just a quick one off the STM question. What are the thoughts right now on mission authorization within Department of Commerce for the regulatory orphans, as you will?
Right. No, we need to figure that out. We're working on some legislation right now that focuses more on the debris questions, but we're finding that as we talk about debris, that mission authorization is kind of part and parcel to that. We'll have to see exactly how we frame that, but it's a question that does need to be answered for sure. And I think based on what I've seen, Department of Commerce is the right place to put that.
Can I follow up on that? I thought we had a lot of action around that on the Hill side a couple years ago, and then it's gotten a bit quiet. is that just there's a lot going on? Is there more to it? Do you see that as being needing a separate vehicle versus sort of separate set of hearings? I mean, is it ripe enough to add to something?
It's a question we're working through. There's a possibility it could move sooner, but we're working through what that would look like from a bill strategy standpoint, a legislative strategy standpoint, and also kind of figuring out where the consensus is and where the different players on the Hill are in terms of that particular role. We'll see. I mean, it's certainly part of the conversation. I can't say at this point whether it's going to be part of an initial legislative package rollout or a later addition to a package or a separate standalone bill, but it's certainly part of the conversation.
Any questions from our members online?
Like the question I had before, which was looking at the human spaceflight learning period. Look at the statute really lays out a nice series of steps. So FAA has some reports, and are you all sort of looking to that as well? So wait for the reports. Do you then anticipate a set of hearings and then language? How are you all thinking about that?
Yeah, there's going to have to be some hearings, so we're going to have to talk about that and build a record, I think. I mean, I say that being full realization that right now we're the minority, and so it's definitely a negotiation, and we have to work with our majority on hearings, scheduling hearings. But yeah, I mean, I think there needs to be a record built up. I think there needs to be a pretty clear accounting of the things that we figured out so far, that industry's figured out so far, and then where do we have left to go? What are the unanswered questions there? So yeah, I think there needs to be a record built up. I think we're doing some due diligence on that. We'll have some time to do some more due diligence on it, but that's certainly part of what's on the horizon for us.
I can make this a fireside chat, but I'm going to just stop.
No, it's great. Yeah.
Joel, I got a quick question, and I don't mean to put you on the spot because there are cameras. But, been doing this for many decades, and there's no question that over the last couple of decades, anything associated with space, there's always been a looming, powerful presence on appropriations that is soon to be gone. You see filling that vacuum, or will it? Okay, nobody's going to fill it the way he has, but nature abhors a vacuum. So eventually, someone or a group of people will rise to the challenge.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're right. We in the Space Force are losing a champion. Corrections Committee in many ways. I'm actually going to turn that back around on this group and the folks on Zoom. And I think the question is who fills that vacuum? I think that's up to a lot of advocacy. I mean, that depends on a lot of advocacy, a lot of education, informing members that come in afterwards to say, hey, space is important. Our national exploration goals are important. Our commercial space industry is important. Here's why. Here's the economic impact. And so I think it's up in the air as to who and I don't know if it will be just one champion, right? It may not be. And I think we're probably in a better situation if it's not just one person that's carrying the entire day for the industry. I think if we if we in the space community can educate members and show them how important this is and how much this contributes to American diplomacy in space and leadership in space, I think having many champions is a much better way to go. And I think having many members that understand why it's important to fund these activities is a much more sustainable long-term approach than having one member.
So this has been an ongoing dynamic for a while now. And have you seen those other people, from my perspective, I've seen other people start to step up. Are you seeing the same dynamic, or am I just kind of missing the?
No, I think you're right. I think we have seen members step up. I think we've seen, obviously Senator Moran as chair of the CJS, or ranking of the CJS subcommittee, has been a champion. We appreciate certainly his hard work. I know my boss as chair and then ranking of the Commerce Committee has been driving on these issues and wanting to advance this. And so, yes, I think we've seen members come in to sort of step up and say, this is an important set of goals and an important enterprise, and we need to support it.
This has been a dynamic time. We have NASA wanting to do some ambitious goals. I'm seeing a real strong play by the commercial and more reliance on commercial upstarts. How do you maintain the balance there? And it's really a pivot point for, I'd say, the entire space infrastructure as a whole.
It is, and that's a great point. As NASA moves forward with the Artemis program and its science goals and exploration goals and certainly commercial low Earth orbit goals and as well, it's important to remember that we do need to keep our eye on, obviously, the amazing capabilities that are coming online within the commercial sector that can play a huge role there and save the government money and save the taxpayers money and provide amazing capabilities that were previously only government capabilities. And I think we also need to have our eye on what are kind of exquisite government capabilities that need to be national priorities. I would say that when it comes to commercial LEO and sort of the future of whatever the post-ISS world looks like, it's important as we have this ecosystem, as we have this commercial ecosystem of stations, to really identify, for NASA to identify what are our national priorities and needs when it comes to low Earth orbit. What are our, the things that we need to be able to work with our international partners on, the capabilities and the platforms that we need to have access to for our core national mission. So there's going to be some questions about that in terms of, we're facing this question right now with NASA of what happens when you move towards a more production and operations sustainment, with things like the SLS and Orion. And that needs to happen, certainly that needs to happen. We need to get to a cadence there and get to a place where that's sustainable. And part of the question is, what do you do with this NASA workforce, this development workforce that's been, it's been supporting the centers? So how do we sustain the NASA workforce and NASA centers and right size them and make sure that they're the core capabilities and expertise that you need at the NASA centers is preserved and maintained, and finding out whatever that next big development project is or set of next development projects are, that keep NASA, the centers, healthy and thriving. Those are big questions, and those are things that we're looking at and things that I hope NASA is as well. But yeah, to answer your question, I think it's going to be even more critical as we have so many unique, novel capabilities coming online in the private sector, not just figuring out how to take advantage of those for our national missions and goals, but where are the gaps and how do we fill those with, if there's nothing in the market that can fill the gap that we need for a national capability, then how do we achieve that capability?
And I'd say the value proposition has pivoted as well. It used to be, national capabilities versus other, international capabilities. Do you see this as, more of the opportunity value proposition of commercial, or is it national interest to say the Chinese now have, an emerging space program, and, how do we balance that one? I can see both sides of those value propositions, but I think you've got the tough job to say, how do we go through and set a balance on much government-led activity and how do we encourage more commercial development as well?
Sure. Yeah. No, it's a tough balance sometimes. I mean, those are big questions. Yeah. The bottom line is we do need to maintain a national U.S.-led international coalition capability in low Earth orbit in some fashion. To counter what the Chinese are doing, they're aggressively going after researchers for their station. They're telling people, basically free up mass and come research on our station. And by the way, if you have intellectual property you want to use later on, good luck keeping them from stealing that. But it's one of those things where we need to make sure that we have an allied presence in low Earth orbit to say, hey, no, come research on our station, come do things on our commercial LEO destinations and our ecosystem, and keeping the international partnership alive is one of the key parts of that. So yeah, it's a tough balance to strike sometimes, but I think it's one NASA is thinking about.
So with that, you see a lot of change, you see a lot of development. And I think one thing, COMSTAC with the FAA, and, you know, making sure that they are well equipped to keep up with this rapid development and this rapid new capabilities. And, you know, again, it's another balance to say we want to encourage that. We want, you know, more investment. We want more capabilities. At the same time, we just need to make safety. And so is the regulatory environment out there. I don't want it to where it squelches that, but at the same time, we've got a primary duty to ensure, you know, the safety, I think, both, you know, of the general public. But I think as, you know, as we start expanding these missions in space and doing things that were just never encountered in previous regulations, we need to kind of keep pace with that. And so it's more of a, you know, a plea for continued partnership to say, you know, make sure the FAA is, you know, given the tools, the resources in order to keep up with the pace, because there sure is a lot of money going in development of these new systems and capabilities.
Yeah, tools and resources. That's a great point. I mean, we're looking at and bringing it kind of back to the FAA world here for a second. I kind of got on a NASA tangent, but yeah, it's interesting. Yes, you're right. Right now, that obviously the safety of the public is first and foremost in the licensing process, as it should be. The human spaceflight, as it is now, it operates under the informed consent regime, and we're learning what it means to operate safely when you have not just different systems, but different concepts of operation, different architectures, different vehicles. What's safe for one concept of operation and vehicle might not be for another, and there's differences that I think are unique to the different space systems human spaceflight system we're seeing coming online. Having a regulatory process in the future that is responsive to that and can ensure safety while not dictating how to achieve it in some cases is going to be part of the questions we have to figure out. I mean, that's what we're looking at when we talk about the looming deadline on the learning period is, where do we go from here, and how do we provide a roadmap to whatever the future looks like there when you have whatever comes after this informed consent regime.
We have a question that came in online, and for folks that are listening live, please feel free to submit your questions through the COMSTAC webpage or the link on YouTube. One question for you, Joel, that just came through. Any developments on the NTSB's statements about space investigations?
Yes, as I understand it, and I don't know, the latest information I have is that there are conversations ongoing between FAA and NTSB about updating the MOU, which is exactly what we wanted to see. That is what we wanted to see happen, was that conversation be held, and for the two agencies to come to an agreement there. I think there are valuable expertise at NTSB when it comes to investigating things. Certainly there's the bulk of the space expertise and the licensing and safety expertise for the vehicles is at FAA. So making sure that the two agencies are working together was really our primary goal there. It's like I said at the meeting in January, we don't want one agency charging off in one direction and ignoring the others. And so this has to be a collaborative effort. It has to be a multi-agency effort and a whole government effort. And so we're glad to see that there are conversations happening between NTSB and FAA.
I'll go ahead and ask another one unless there's another question in the room. Go ahead.
I have one, Joel, thank you, and I apologize for being in traffic. We are all using government facilities, although some are building their own launch sites, and most are impacted by climate change. And we're having major hurricane impacts on our facilities across the board. I know you all have been very much involved in replacing roofs and helping us mitigate some of those. But do you think Congress understands that there are national security implications from the impact of climate change on our spaceports?
I'm sure there's research out there about it. One of the things is, judging or looking at sort of what we learned from the hurricanes, obviously down at Stennis Space Center in Mississippi and the Chute Assembly Facility, is that having resilient facilities is important. Having facilities that can withstand weather and environmental impacts is key. So I think, looking at how we need to build things and what we need to build in terms of structural resiliency and making sure that our infrastructure is strong. I think that's one of the key things. The Michoud assembly facility just got a new roof. It's a much better roof than the old one that was falling in, and so we expect that's going to be able to protect these, the vital hardware that's in the facility. And so I think, looking at ways that we can make our infrastructure more resilient is a good way to look at it. The other part to that is pivoting back to NASA for a second. There's a lot of NASA infrastructure that's in poor condition as well, and needs maintenance and needs upkeep and needs repair. And so that's across the agency. So whether it's in a zone that could be affected by changing climate or not, there's a big challenge in terms of NASA and their infrastructure and how we move forward with that, repair facilities and upgrade them.
The one that came through online, I haven't actually heard this question in a long time. I'm curious to hear your answer. Are there any continued discussions on the Hill regarding elevating AST under the Secretary's office?
That's an interesting one. That was I remember that was being discussed probably a couple years back, around the time where we're looking at the Space Frontier Act, which I hate we weren't able to get that one pushed across the line. That was, we're looking forward to working that one through the House, and they weren't interested. So what can you do there? But yeah, no, those were the conversations. I think as the FAA process kind of gets moving, we might see some continued talks about that. I don't really know. I haven't taken the temperature of our members or our, of a consensus right now, but I know that's been a conversation in the past and could be in the future as well.
I asked a rhetorical question to follow up to the comment I made to the acting administrator yesterday. There's a certain FAA culture which is all about a very mature transportation system that we understand very well and has a prescriptive regulatory environment. It's incredibly safe. This North Star safety culture that comes from there at FAA, though, is a little bit incompatible with having an industry that's much less mature, that's disruptive and nascent, and is doing an iterative development process where you're learning and failure rates are much higher than they're used to. When I asked that question, the response I got back was all about 99.99 whatever percent safety rates, and that just is not compatible with the history of spaceflight where we are. We're getting better, but I would just say that I think there's a real good reason to make that move and put it back where the office was originally intended to be under the Secretary's.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, you're certainly right about the different sort of maturity states of the industry, and I think that is why from what I've seen, AST is kind of unique in that way. That they do think about things a little bit different.
And they've been great today. It's just my concern is this bleed of the safety culture for FAA, and sometimes safety culture can be dangerous.
Joe, what do you think of the progress of Airspace Integration so far?
Yeah, so that's it, as I understand it, at ATO now. It's going forward. I haven't seen much movement recently, I will say. I know they're working on it. I know it's a huge challenge because anytime you integrate something new into the air transportation system, I mean, you're dealing with systems that have to have a 24/7, 365 uptime, handling the nation's airspace. So that's not something you just want to take offline for any period of time. I know that's so it is challenging sometimes to work processes and systems into that. But from what I understand, ATO is moving forward. We'll probably be getting a briefing from them, sometime in the near future on the status of that. But yeah, I mean that's a critical part of it.
So I got a question. I think it's safe to say that 2 years from now, if not next year, we'll be looking back at where we have been the last few years in we've had money. And 2 years from now, they ain't gonna be much. And I guess I'm looking at it in the context, how, from your perspective, how might we collectively try to shape the message to the broader membership in the House and Senate that doesn't pay attention to space on a regular basis? They have their own concerns. But you've seen things like the engagement, the extent to which we're using our intelligence to inform the Ukrainians is primarily space-based assets. the innovation that Starlink provided to the Ukrainians with their terminals, and, overcoming Russian hacking, and just the extent to which the space industry persevered and accomplished a great deal even during the teeth of the pandemic. You know, we put thousands of commercial satellites in outposts, astronauts up, went to Mars. So there's a lot of good stories that I think help fundamentally reinforce why space is important. But that's only going to work if that percolates up into the people who are serving on, agriculture or, what Indian affairs, but they all vote on our budget and they help set policy. Is there anything you can think of that would help us better understand how we can convey our message to the public that then gets to what we vote? That's an awkward question, I realize, but
Well, I mean, it's a good question, and it's one you're absolutely right that the engagement is key. Making sure. I mean, I'll just say I think there's been a lot of turnover on Capitol Hill, certainly at the staff level. In fact, this is something I was chatting with some folks last night about that I've kind of noticed recently, and dealing with some things that are happening right now on Capitol Hill in the Senate, is that there's been a lot of staff turnover, and I think our kind of, when you look at the broad knowledge base of what's happening in the space industry, what's the state of the industry, what's the state of NASA, what's the state of FAA right now, I think as that turnover has happened, and that happened through the pandemic, and that happened over the last couple of years, I think there's been a little bit of loss of awareness in some ways. And I'm not saying that's probably unavoidable, right, when you have new members and new staff coming in, but I think there's been a little bit of an erosion of that understanding that I've seen from where we were a couple of years ago with getting the NASA authorization done, and we had the Space Frontier Act, and those initiatives. I think there's a much broader understanding of the state of play. So yeah, I mean, as much as you can, meet with the member offices that you work with. When new staff come in, say, hey, we'd like to talk to you about what we're doing, what space in your state looks like, why it's important, and why our national space goals and also the commercial space goals are key, and worth promoting. So I think there needs to be a little bit more education across the spectrum. I don't know, I don't have as much of a handle on the House side, but certainly in the Senate, I think there's been some erosion in sort of the general understanding of what's going on. I should also clarify, I find that more off committee than on committee. Our members on the Commerce Committee, obviously, they're very heavily involved in a lot of this. Yeah. So the committee members, I feel like there's a much better, but much better awareness. But I think once you get off the committee and kind of out of that space, there's probably some education work to do.
So you all, the committee's led the way on the Space Act. I'm thinking about the organizational side of orbital debris. And is there a gap there? Is there more for you all to think about as far as the orbital debris environment, sustainability issues? Is that the next step?
Yeah, I mean, there's always more to be done, right? Once we get Department of Commerce and Office of Space Commerce to a good spot, and hopefully get them elevated out of NESDIS. I mean, that's been one of our things we've been talking about. It doesn't, there's questions as to how far you elevate that, right? There's been proposals to different levels in the past, but getting it the stature, the recognition, and the support it needs to be successful, I think is the main thing there. So there's that, the organizational challenge. I do appreciate, like I said, Dr. Spinrad's commitment to supporting that office and the mission. But yeah, I mean, once you think about, in the future, if we get the OADR stood up, if Commerce gets the OADR stood up, puts that sort of basic SSA capability together, where do we go from there? And what does it look like to help that become a foundation for a growing space safety industry, right? Well, how does that serve as sort of the incubator for whatever these space safety capabilities will look like, whether it's the enhanced space safety, space situational awareness kind of services we're seeing now, or future even things such as debris mitigation, remediation, active debris removal technologies and such. I mean, that's that's down the road. But certainly looking at how we, through the Office of Space Commerce, support the space safety industry and build out and help that thrive. That's the big question. I think we're going to need some economic analysis as part of that too. That's going to be, we're going to have to be very clear-eyed in terms of, what is the state of the market for these kinds of services for different varying levels of services. What level of service is important for Department of Commerce to sort of provide that foundation, that base. What does that look like, and then how do you do that in a way that doesn't close out on commercial offerings, but does enhance safety for everyone and allows industry to build off of that.
Another question that came in online, I'm just going to read it as is. Do you see a bigger need for data and applications for weather detailed information to promote a more robust launch and multimodal framework?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, knowing what the weather's going to do is pretty important, whether you're launching rockets or or sailing cargo or whatever it is. So I'll confess I don't handle the NOAA portfolio at the committee. That's probably a question that I think, in terms of the state of our weather prediction analysis modeling, would probably be best better answered by our NOAA, my colleagues that handle NOAA. But certainly can agree that knowing what the weather is going to be and understanding how how these environmental factors play in is important. I mean, to my knowledge, that's one of NOAA's big purposes and priorities. So.
One thing that the industry needs to assure success is a good talent pipeline. What is the Senate thinking about building the space pipeline for the future? Yes,
well, STEM education is just 100% important. I mean, every company I talk to is having trouble right now finding talent, finding engineers, finding scientists, finding people to fill these jobs. And the thing is, I mean, the space industry, there's competition within the space industry for this type of talent. But we have to remember that the space industry is not the only place, and the space industry is competing with other industries for this as well. Whether it's the broader technology sphere or Silicon Valley or wherever that is. I mean, we're competing for talent with those companies and those industries as well. So yeah, I mean, we're looking at, we think that the U.S. Innovation Competition Act is a key piece of that. I mean, having fundamentally transforming the basic research and science and development landscape for the foreseeable future is part of that. And of course it goes to the point of competing with China. I mean, that's pretty much the big overarching point of the bill, is to make sure that we're not caught in a lurch when with the emphasis the Chinese are placing on their development. So yeah.
If I might chime in, I hope you might consider the fact that we are increasingly, well, we have been, and it's probably stable, filling our seats in STEM education with Chinese students who we can't hire into this industry. And I think the United States needs to look seriously at what the purpose of our higher education system is in regards to our national priorities and long-term benefits.
Yeah, I mean, we're, as part of the bill, I mean, slightly different issue. And I will also caveat this by saying I'm not specifically handling this part of the bill, but I know that research security and making sure that our, higher education and research apparatus is protected from, from espionage and from nefarious activities by peer adversaries is part of that bill.
Lab security is a real problem, but if you just flat cannot hire 25 or 40% of the students that we're putting through our educational system into this industry, that's a problem.
Well, it goes to having American kids and kids from other parts of the world that can come and not just come and get an education and go back with, but stay here and be part of what we're doing and part of the industry. In talking to STEM educators, you have to, when you go to talk to kids in school, you have to get them around 3rd grade, is what I understand. You have to talk to them young. You have to go in and say, hey, there's all these possibilities. If you want to work on aerospace projects, you want to work on space vehicles, if you want to work on aircraft, you want to work on these cutting edge technologies, that has to be a seed that's planted pretty young. So, certainly working, NASA's Office of STEM Engagement and others, I think there's a big effort that needs to be undertaken there to make sure that we're showing American students that, hey, this is a real need. And if you have an interest in this, we would encourage you to pursue it and give you opportunities to do so.
We have one final question, I think, that's coming online from the press, actually. Are you concerned about the proposal to strip language from USICA authorizing spending on a second Artemis commercial lunar lander?
Yes, the short answer is yes. It goes back to the fundamental point that we were in talking about how NASA is undertaking the Artemis program and how NASA is having this mix of traditional sort of national programs and capabilities and looking to the commercial sector for other parts of the architecture. By doing the human landing system the way they're doing it, you have to have dissimilar redundancy. You have to have multiple approaches. You have to have multiple designs. And you have to have a competitive environment when you move into the services phase later on. By its nature, you have to have multiple competitors able to compete there. Otherwise, you're going to have essentially, a monopoly type of situation. And so that's why we've maintained from the very beginning that NASA should have at least, or really two or at least two teams, two providers, two designs for the human landing system to get our astronauts to and from the surface. It's interesting as I talk about this issue in particular to our member offices. I'm finding that once they kind of understand what this is, what the authorization, that $10 billion that's in there, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. We've seen some pretty misleading talking points in terms of what that money's for and what that does. That is the number that we've gotten, and that's in line with the NASA's budgets, is the number for the entire program. That gets us two dissimilar designs, and paves the way for a competitive environment as they move to the services phase. And so having that education, the more I talk to member offices, the more, they're like, okay, so this is what's going on. They get it and they understand. And really it boils down to, we have to be in a position to succeed with Artemis because the Chinese are going to the moon and we have to be there to counter them. I mean, the last thing we want is a South China Sea situation on the south pole of the moon with a 9-dash line around the south pole of the moon. And so we have to be able to counter that. And that is one of the overarching goals. And so as I talk to member offices about this, they're starting, they understand it. They get the points here and they understand that, it's not about a company or a person or a personality. It's about making sure that we have similar redundancy in the program, the way that NASA briefed us all along. There's been so much consistency when you hear from the politically accountable Senate confirmed leadership at NASA that we need this approach. It was notably in the absence of that politically accountable leadership that the decision was made. So, from our position, we take NASA at its word that they need multiple dissimilar approaches, and so we support that.
Great, thank you.
Well, we peppered you with questions for a solid 30 minutes now. So thank you so much, Joel, for coming, and thank you to you and the committee for supporting commercial space industry as we move forward.
Yeah, happy to be here. No, thank you.
We will take a 10-minute break at 10 o'clock.
All right, we're ready to go ahead and resume. We have Dr. Valerie Gowron from MITRE to present on some research topics. She is, like I said, with MITRE, one of the federally funded research corporations. MITRE does some great work for us as well. So Valerie, I'll turn it over to you, and if you kind of just take over and explain to us, maybe introduce yourself a little more than I did, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So yesterday, the administrator talked about Star Trek, and as I was walking through the halls at MITRE this morning, people were wishing me happy Star Wars Day. Did you know May 4th is Star Wars Day? And wait for it, you know what the traditional words are when you wish someone happy Star Wars Day? May the 4th be with you.
Yes.
All right. So I'm a human factors engineer. I have been part of NASA's bioastronautics development and review team for about 40 years. Yes, I'm a very old lady. And I had the great pleasure in working on the space health. So John, if we may have the slides up. All right, so I'll be talking about space health. If we may go to the next one. Like the other presenters, we really went and understood what previous COMSTACs had been doing. May we have the next slide? And we heard even Joel this morning talk about what great work COMSTAC had done even during the pandemic. So this is from September 14th, 2020, 6 months into the pandemic. And the observation from the safety working group and was that existing commercial space standards need to be determined for the human spaceflight safety framework. And it's a very long process. It's a very difficult process. We need to get started. The recommendation from that working group was the FAA retain a systems engineering and technical assistance organization to conduct the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act requirement for that independent review on readiness. We may go to the next slide, please. So we heard and we reached out to the CSF folks, and they are fantastic partners. Karina, I cannot thank you enough for everything that you did for this workshop. So working with CSF, we wanted to have a workshop bringing everyone to the table to create a human research program for spaceflight participants in the commercialization of space. Next slide, please. And we had a wonderful working group, a couple of people I want to really pull out, and they were fantastic. Melcher Antoniano, he's the director of the FAA Civil Aerospace Med Institute. Melcher has been working in this since 2001 when Dennis Tito became the first space tourist. And he was absolutely fantastic in bringing the right people. Sarisha Banlaw, fantastic. Again, a lot of energy, a lot of openness, and really, really helping. Ken Davidian, FAA, reports to Jim, absolutely fantastic. And of course, I've already mentioned Karina, just opened the doors, helped us reach out to people. It was very, very good. We also were suggested to use Michael Marge as a consultant, and we did. We brought him on. Michael had come from a very long history of trying to do space health work. He was working at Health and Human Services, and he was fantastic in reaching out to people. We also really want to thank Tommy Sanford. He was with CSF at that time, Blue Origin now, and was instrumental in getting the right people to the table. And of course, we had fantastic help from Mike Schmidt and Victor Schneider from NASA, and of course, John Allen, also NASA. Next slide, please. So that working group was fantastic. Everyone pulled together. There was no, this is proprietary, this is something that we want to keep very restricted. No, everyone was very open on their plans, their needs, their limitations and funding, all of that. And we formed two subcommittees. One was for suborbital. Mark Shellhammer chaired that. Absolutely fantastic gentleman, if you've ever worked with Mark. Intellectually, one of the giants in this area, and just able to bring us all together. And very impressive list of people. Also, please note that Erica Wagner was on both the suborbital and orbital and beyond. And again, a lot of energy and really an openness. And as Erica said, all of the folks on the committees are friends. We work together. We wanted to do the best. So fantastic on suborbital and great on orbital. I had the great pleasure of working with Michael Schmidt, again, one of the giants in this area, absolutely fantastic. And also we had great support from folks like Victor Schneider, very open on what NASA was planning. And Anil from SpaceX, again, very, very open on what the future plans were and what was really needed in addressing health of spaceflight participants. We can go to the next slide. So we held a 2-day virtual workshop, and it was May 11th of last year. And again, Michael Mart was a consultant to MITRE. Tommy at that time was with CSF, and they were co-chairs. Karina did a beautiful job in welcoming people, and people still talk about how it was very open, it was energized, this is something we need to do. We also had the honor of Carrie Buckley, who is the Vice President of MITRE's Air Force Center, presenting, and she still talks about how important this is, given that Space Force is desperately needing information also on space health. Mike Barrett, he's fantastic. Everybody knows him in the room, I'm sure. NASA astronaut, physician. He has fantastic stories. He has the best space health book by any standards. And I use it as a weight lift because it's at least like now 9 pounds. And it's just a fantastic book. And he gave a rousing plenary and talked about some of the health challenges. Astronauts, highly selected, highly monitored, highly trained. Space flight participants, not on any of those, right? We then had a discussion on suborbital and orbital, and again, great discussions on future hope, SpaceX, Boeing, Axiom, Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, all participating. We may have the next slide, please. In the afternoon, we had the government side talking about what are the limitations and what are the needs. The NASA folks really focused on the need for exploration, that is their mission. And we had wonderful inputs from Leith States at Health and Human Services. Leith talked about the importance of space for learning how we can counter diseases and injuries on Earth. Think about it. So in space, we have bone loss. On Earth, we have osteoporosis. The things that we learn in space about maintaining bone structure, can we use that for treating osteoporosis on Earth? Things we learn in space about treating radiation exposure, can we use that for folks here on Earth in terms of radiation cancer treatment recovery? So the interest was there. It was very exciting. And you could tell everyone was pulling together. And of course, Melcher set the bar very high. He wants to have the data that support the expert opinions we've got now on what conditions can be allowed in space and what should not. And he was thinking more than just the space flight tourists. He was thinking, who are going to build the wonderful cities in space? Who's going to do the mining, the manufacturing? Who is going to be keeping the tourist facilities up and running? What kinds of people with what kinds of conditions do we need? What can we use for countermeasures on things like space sickness? Mark Shellhammer, again, did a great job in talking about some of the challenges in suborbital, and Michael Schmidt focused on the orbital and beyond. And of course, Leith States, again, Health and Human Services, what can we learn in space that we can apply on Earth? In the afternoon, I presented with Sybil. Sybil heads up MITRE's internal research and development in health. Jim mentioned that MITRE operates a FFRDC for the FAA. We also operate one for Health and Human Services. And Leith talked about the importance of being data-driven and collecting data now, and not just during the space flight, but also longitudinally, thinking about people who are spending very long periods of time in space. And when we built on that, we want to be able to collect data. So Sybil has been leading this collection of data. Think Health and Human Services data privacy is critical. And we were joined by Kathy Jenkins. She is one of the most fantastic people in the entire universe, in my opinion. She works with children in very rare diseases. And she uses small amounts of data to find trends to be able to treat children with very unusual diseases. The same kinds of techniques that we could apply because we have such a small number currently of spaceflight participants. Ken Vidian did the moderating the questions and answers. There were quite a few. We moved on to orbital and suborbital questions in the afternoon. And next slide, please. We then had day 2, more questions came up. They were especially oriented towards what's the next steps? What's the most important things that we need to address and in what order? And Karina did a beautiful job in overseeing the working group summary reports, and Erica provided the summary on suborbital and Victor on orbital and beyond. And then we had recommendations and next steps. Again, you've got a wonderful group of FAA, CSF, HHS, and NASA working together. We adjourned. Next slide, please. And then we wrote the report based on the workshop and all of the work that the working groups had done, and look at all of the contributing organizations to the report. Axiom Space, we had fantastic input from them. Baylor, Boston's, I already told you about Kathy Jenkins, talking about what techniques can be used to find trends with very small amounts of data. Blue Origin, Erica is always wonderful. Cami Melcher is fantastic. Great support from CSF. Department of Commerce weighed in and were interested in long-term effects of space. Again, we talked about Space Force and Department of Defense, also expecting eventually to be spacebound. FAA, great support. Ken was fantastic. NASA, Victor is one of my heroes. He just manages to understand all of the problems and come up with solutions. Orbital Medicine and Savaris, both great companies. SpaceX weighed in heavily. So did the Boeing company, Johns Hopkins. MITRE was present, Trish and Virgin Galactic. All of those organizations contributed to the report, and all of them reviewed the report to make sure that we got it right. Next slide, please. And we rolled out the report. Once all those people had approved it, we said, okay, let's now tell the world that the report's there and ready for review. Again, we got a great welcome. Karina, thank you. Kiri did her magic as well. And Bruce Morris did a fantastic job from Sierra Space. And he talked about space industry perspectives. And they were very, very open on the needs for space health research. We want to make sure that we can have everyone has a right to go to space. Not everyone should. How do we make the distinction between who would be at risk and who would not? And for those at risk, can we countermeasure that risk? We then had a fantastic federal government perspective. Again, Victor is one of my heroes, Melcher's another, and Lee's my third. They were very, very open on the next steps on how to do data collection and analysis and still maintain privacy. and even have a federated method of sharing the data across. Next, please. And at the end, we had Dora Denovio presenting on Trish. This was Inspiration 4 discussion. And then I talked about, and with Sybil, how to create a database that was federated and could be predicted. We've had a lot of experience. Sybil's done some fantastic work. Already mentioned the work with Boston Children's, but we've done it also with other patient safety issues. And certainly, I think this group probably knows MITRE has done work in informatics and developed an electronic health record for oncology that has been fantastic in identifying rare reactions to some of the treatments to cancer. The same kind of approach that we could use in space health. Mark Shellhammer did a great presentation on priority, and then we had the closing remarks. The link there will get you right to the entire report. It's there, open. We've had literally thousands of downloads of the report, both on the CSF site and on the MITRE site, and comments from folks. What we've been hearing most is, what's the next step? How do we make this real? So if we can go to the next slide, please. So these were the research areas, and they are in the order of prioritization. Suborbital, space motion sickness. If you were able to see the CNN report today on one of the flights that had just happened in December, one of the issues is space motion sickness. It wasn't debilitating, but it's still there. The flights are short. But we want to make it completely comfortable for people. So how do we do that? Another issue on sleep deprivation, anxiety, and stress, those happen, and we need to be able to address those. The wonderful words from Erica Wagner: space is for everybody. It doesn't matter what disability you have. If we can get you to space, you have a right to go to space. How do we know who can and who can't? And what do we need to do to make it possible for everyone to go? We certainly have a lot of pre-existing health conditions. Astronauts do not. They're highly selected to be extremely healthy, but folks want to go. And on democratization of space, folks with pre-existing health conditions want to go. We also, looking at the longer term, the miners who went to work on the Alaskan pipeline, guess what? Number one disease, cardiovascular issues and hypertension. Many of them already have had 1 or 2 heart attacks already. Asthma, another big one. Who will go to build the wonderful facilities in space? Will they be the same type of people who went to go build the Alaskan pipeline? Probably. How do we protect them? How do we know who should not be part of the workforce of space? And we also really worry about acceleration forces. Microgravity in the short term is always fun. As a survivor of a couple of the Vomit Comet flights, it is fun for very short periods of time, but it is an issue for some people. Cardiovascular response and the effect on the spine. Suborbital. On orbital, we get physiological effects. We've had a couple of times where we've had even astronauts and cosmonauts kind of shut down with psychological issues as well. Certainly the space encounter radiation is an issue. We need to protect people. We need to understand how to respond to that. We also have a issue of distance from Earth phenomenon. I am blessed with a number of astronaut friends, and they talk about they feel isolated, they feel I can't go home. And how do they handle that? And they all did it with outreach to family and friends. Isolation, another issue, the acceleration, and what pre-flight training. Again, disabilities and pre-existing health conditions. One of the recommendations was looking at developing a public-private partnership to safeguard data, support analysis, and share anonymized findings. And we developed a white paper that was sent out to folks. Next slide, please. And it went out to the advisory committee. So when Tommy Sanford was still with CSF, he really recommended that there be an advisory committee. And as I told you, the comments from people downloading the report was, what's next? How do we make this happen? And so we wanted to be able to have a fantastic advisory committee. Again, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to work with Melcher. He is articulate. He is very focused on making this safe and enjoyable for all spaceflight participants. Sarisha, I just love working with her. She's an astronaut now and articulate on, again, making this a wonderful experience for people. Rich is fantastic. Dorit is heading Trish. Mike is another fantastic, very get it done focused person. Mike from SpaceX, big player in this area. And I'm sorry, I added his name twice. I didn't catch that. My apologies. Christian Meander from Axiom, one of the most articulate and thought-provoking people I've ever worked with in my life. Bruce Morris, excellent. He handled one of the moderating of one of the groups extremely well. Mike Schmidt, I already told you, I think he walks on water. He's that good. Victor is one of my heroes, always has been. Leith is absolutely fantastic and has identified that the Secretary of Health and Human Services, this is an area of interest and will be maintaining interest in this. And Erica, I already told you, she is fantastic, brings people together and gets things done. Next slide. This is how you can reach me. And I really look forward to questions. And I was told to speak till 10:27. I only have 3 minutes for questions. I think I did that. Hey, Jim, did I do okay?
You did fine. Thank you. And are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Valerie. We do have a couple of questions that came in online. And I'll pause in between the two just to see if folks in the room have questions. The first one is there an opportunity to sign up to contribute to the advisory committees?
We are hoping to do that. Karina, we need your guidance on this. A MITRE would not go into moving forward on this without CSF. Without you, we don't feel strong enough. Also, should the advisory committee be part of COMSTAC? So we've got Greg Autry will be talking about the safety working group. Should this advisory group be reporting to the COMSTAC safety working group? It's certainly needed. We see exponential growth. I am hoping in my lifetime that I will see cities in space, and I am hoping that we will be doing fantastic research there, but we need to help to get to that next step. So yes, we would absolutely love people to sign up for the workshops, the advisory committee workshops.
Thanks, Valerie. And then another question is, will the link to the study be made available?
Yes, it is on the slides, and we can put it in the website. If you go to CSF or to MITRE's external websites, and just do space flight as a search, you will find it. It'll come up on each.
Valerie will also put it on our website for COMSTAC.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And it's a beginning, but we need to continue.
All right, thank you, Valerie. I appreciate it very much. And appreciate you taking the questions and all the research that you headed up. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to present.
All right. Next, we have Andrew Nelson from ASTM F47 Standards Committee. He is the vice chair of this committee. In full disclosure, I am also on the executive committee representing AST. But I've asked Andrew to come and talk to you about where they are because of the standards work and recommendations that COMSTAC is involved with. And then later this afternoon, he'll be joining us again as a presenter, but to be there as I ask you for some advice and recommendations and observations on some questions that we have in AST as we start writing the next. We're already writing it, and we ask Aerospace to help us with this. The final of the 3 voluntary consensus standards reports. So Andrew, if you are available and ready, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Jim. I'm ready to go. I have some slides. Should I share those on my screen, or do you want to present them from your side?
They're coming up momentarily.
Okay, great, wonderful. Yeah, can't do anything. Oh, that's a nice slide. Okay, if we can go to my first slide, please. Wonderful, thank you very much. So I'd like to thank the COMSTAC for having ASTM F47 give you a briefing on the status update of where we're at with some of the standards activities that we're working with. I am Andrew Nelson, I'm the vice chairman. Little background, I've been doing standards work on and off for almost my whole career. Early on, I got involved in aviation standards work with the International Civil Aviation Organization and RTCA and NATO STANAGs. And on and off throughout my career have been continuing with this activity, and was one of the first, was at the very first founding meeting of ASTM F47 back in 2016 with Mike L.A. Mike Lopez Alegria, many of you know, is our chairman. He is just returning from the AX-1 mission. We're very excited about that. And the last time I saw him, he looked like a board with all sorts of medical things attached to his face post-mission. I think that was yesterday. So he's still doing a lot of post-mission activities, or else he would be here briefing. Next slide. So the baseline and the fundamental, sort of the foundation of the implementation of standards and how those are used in the U.S. and by the U.S. government in regulatory activities is governed by two foundational pieces. One is the National Technology Transfer and Advancement Act of 1995, NTTA, which requires the federal government to use standards developed by voluntary consensus organizations, and encourages the federal government agencies to participate in these standards development activities. This was followed by OMB Circular A119, and A119 has been massaged and updated over the years, but it basically reinforces the goal of the NTTA. It discourages the federal agencies from producing government unique standards, if at all possible, and clarifies that agency representatives can participate, vote, and even lead activities at SDOs. Moving on to the next slide. So F47, a little background, we were formed in 2016 with the support and interest from Commercial Spaceflight Federation and other industry partners. We're currently up to between 110 and 120 members. Oscar Garcia is our membership director. Many of you know Oscar, having served on COMSTAC for many years, and is doing a great job. We have 8 subcommittees with grow plans, and I'll review those in a bit. Currently have 6 published standards with quite a number in the pipeline. And we do get together, pandemic allowing, twice a year in person, normally around the Space Symposium and then an autumn event. The executive committee meets monthly, and we have a number of task groups that meet on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis, depending. So if we can click on the next, just click. Yeah, so this is the current structure that we have. It's a new structure. We've just done a little bit of a tweak to it recently, where we have basically 5, I'll call them vertical deep dive subcommittees. One is currently in reserve. We used to have occupant safety for both suborbital and orbital, and we combined those two just to have occupant safety. We found that that would be an easier way to manage things. We have launch and reentry vehicles, spaceports, cross-cutting, and then we have 4 horizontal committees that do the management of the activities. So we have executive committee, terminology, standards and road mapping, and a liaison subcommittee. And then we also plugged in the idea that we realize in the future that there are things that are coming down the pipeline, and as we grow and mature as a committee that we're being asked to look at. And so we've just put in some TBDs in the future, so future concepts and potentially longer term on-orbit vehicles, on-orbit satellite standards, that sort of thing. So next slide. So the overall goals and priorities of F-47 is the safe launch, reentry, and missions with data-driven shared best practices, so that we can learn from the activities that go on and implement improvements and capture innovation. We coordinate quite a bit with the FAA on spaceflight regulations. If there's any assistance in advisory circulars, we're certainly here to help, but also commercial standards that can serve as alternative means of compliance. For example, with the new Part 450 regulations, if an individual company or several companies wanted to have an alternative means of compliance instead of one of the advisory circulars, then we can certainly help in that area. We're also working very hard to develop and promulgate commercial human spaceflight safety standards and other standards that will enable the commercialization of LEO and beyond. And of course, we share best practices and consensus guides, and we coordinate with academia, other SDOs, Congress, executive branch, keep people in the loop. Next slide. We have a very broad representation across F-47 with a number of stakeholders and members. So I think we have pretty much all of the vehicle operators for all intents and purposes. Axiom, Boeing, Sierra Space, Blue Origin, Worldview, Space Perspective, Virgin Galactic, SpaceX, many people. And it's incredible to watch and listen in on these meetings when all of these individuals from all of these companies are participating. I'll mention crew safety in particular. That's a very big standard that we're working on. We're coming close to a subcommittee vote. And just listening to, former astronauts who work for Boeing or Sierra Space or Blue Origin or Axiom, or the engineers from SpaceX and Virgin Galactic, and to hear them work together and share experiences, and it's really impressive. There's no sense of a competitor basis on this. It's been really great to listen to. We also have regulators and other U.S. government users who participate. Jim Hatt mentioned that he's on our executive committee. We also have a number of subject matter experts from AST who participate, as well as other parts of FAA. For example, a certification. We have certification folks. We have some software folks that are participating. The Office of Space Commerce, NIST, NASA has been a very big participant. They've come into play very strongly in the last 9 to 12 months, in particular as we started to do the human spaceflight regulations and making sure that their needs and requirements are met. And they made a very strong statement that going forward in the future, it would be wonderful to have commercial spaceflight standards that they can rely on rather than having to produce the volume of documents that they sometimes produce. We've also have White House National Space Council people who participate with us on occasion, and other national airspace users, ALPA, National Air Traffic Control Association members, etc. We've got spaceport operators. We've had participants in our liaison subcommittee from this committee, COMSTAC. Of course, the Commercial Spaceflight Federation is actively engaged, and it's a wonderful partnership there with significant amounts of information flow back and forth. And we have medical professionals. I mentioned too, Baylor College of Medicine and UTMB Health with their folks from, who also do the aerospace medical research work. We've had participants in the liaison committee brief us from CONFER, Small Sat Alliance, and of course we reach out to other standard development organizations like the AIAA, NFPA, and others. So we're really trying to get everyone involved. It's a very open forum. In fact, anyone can join. In fact, we have a couple of people who really aren't in the space industry, but love to do standards and have joined our committee and participate very productively. And so anyone's welcome. So anyone here who wants to participate, we encourage you to join us. Next slide. So just a little background how the committee has evolved and has and where we're at and where we're going. So I look at this as 3 phases. The first phase, which we're sort of closing out now and is overlapping with phase 2, is we were really starting up. We were learning how to do standards. We were recruiting new members. We were responding to a lot of user pull and coordinating with as many people as we could and keeping them briefed on what we were doing. So, you know, you really needed to learn the ASTM way. It's a very good system. It ensures that everyone has a voice, that there is a division on all of the working committees and subcommittees between producers and users and other participants, so that no one committee can have you know, an overweighting of an industry participant type or specific industry participant. The committees and the subcommittees, you only get 1 vote per company, even though you might have multiple participants. And so that helps balance things out. We had to organize the committee and the subcommittees, identify early standards, which we were producing. So it was really a user pull scenario. And we coordinated with various parts of the administration, like FAA, NASA, et cetera, various industry organizations, other SDOs, and of course we recruited subject matter experts. Phase 2 is we've been in for about a year and a half, maybe a little bit longer, which is really, we started to accelerate. We're growing. We started to address the human spaceflight needs and the what I would call the end of the learning period challenge. So we recognize that human spaceflight safety is extremely important, and the industry has taken that very seriously and applied significant resources to starting to engage with the FAA, with NASA on human spaceflight standards. And so we've done basically early on, we did a big cross-reference matrix and map that looked at the various human spaceflight recommended practices that FAA had put together, Randy Repchek a while back, and the team at AST. We've looked extensively at the NASA crew requirements. So Robert Bate from NASA has been sort of the keepers of the 1130 documents and others. And we scoured around all of the SDOs that we could find, any standards there. And we mapped those to a set of needed standards that we could produce in a 2 to 3 year period. And we've then mapped that, and you'll see later where we've got 4 or 5 standards that are being produced now, which hopefully will meet all of those intersections between recommended practices, the crew requirements, et cetera. And we've been very active in keeping people involved. So, for example, we've briefed 2 House committees and the Senate committees that are focused on space. We've briefed different parts of the administration and senior representatives, keep them in the loop, tell us what we're doing. And in fact, one of those meetings produced a very exciting idea. One of the House subcommittees, we were briefing, one of the staffers noted that Mike LA was going to be flying on the AX-1 mission, and he thought it was a great idea to have a standards committee meeting from space. And so you'll see on a slide later, we actually did that during Mike LA's mission, thanks to Axiom and NASA programming some time. And it was a great activity. And I think we had about 300 to 500 people around the world listening to a CSF executive committee meeting. And it was pretty exciting. So we see phase 3 growing now. We're starting to, we've reorganized to meet more needs and challenges in the future. And we also are proposing potentially, if it's brought to us, means of compliance with Part 450 and enabling sustainable low Earth orbit and beyond operations. So we see a potential for our contributions in helping out with rules of the road, if there are standards needed for active debris removal or end-of-life disposal, SSA, STC and space operations. And of course, there's going to be, we see it developing now through various NASA programs, et cetera, habitats at LEO, exploration, resource utilization. So we do see a future where ASTM F47 can make major contributions. Next slide. So we currently have 6 published standards. They're primarily what I would call phase 1 standards. Storage, use, and handling of liquid rocket propellants. We have an ongoing terminology for commercial spaceflight standard. By the way, all these standards that are produced get revisited every 4 to 5 years, and a refresh is done. That's an ASTM requirement. So you can say that all these standards are living standards. They're definitely not static. We've had failure tolerance for occupant safety of suborbital vehicles, space data exchange to integrate space operations into the National Airspace System. By the way, these are all abbreviated names. The real names are longer and a little bit more complex, but you get to you can check those on the specific standard numbers. Training and qualification of safety critical space operations personnel and classifying safety related events. Next slide. So various standards that are under construction, I would consider these phase 1 and phase 2 standards. We have spacecraft vehicle classification types is going through balloting. Crew safety, oh, bless you. The crew safety standard, which I mentioned earlier, is nearing its initial balloting phase. And by the way, just a comment on balloting. This is a consensus system. And so every standard actually goes through 3 levels of balloting. There's a subcommittee level, which people who have largely participated and put the standard together vote. If there is 1 negative ballot, then the system basically stops, addresses that specific comment, updates it or finds it non-persuasive. But mostly it's addressed, and then it's reballoted at the subcommittee level. It'll then be balloted at the full committee level. And again, if there's any negatives, they're all addressed very thoroughly, very deeply. And then if there's a negative, it's reballoted at the committee level. And then there's a higher level ASTM balloting process as well, which is more of a review to make sure it fits in with various things. I have Kat Coperna on the call today as well. So if we have any specific ASTM process questions, Kat can certainly jump in and answer those either on the chat or verbally. We also are working on software systems and verification for space vehicles. That's part of our human spaceflight initiatives, spaceflight safety for critical systems qualification. We have a standard that's just coming to ballot. It's going to be very helpful for spaceports. It's basically a way for spaceports to describe their capabilities and services and facilities in a common way, which will help users. And so, for example, if you have latitudes and longitudes mentioned, it's recommended that all of those latitudes and longitudes be displayed in the same geodetics system, which has been identified. So I think that's a good one. That's coming to ballot very soon. Suborbital spaceflight participant medical qualifications has been to ballot and is being reballoted soon. And orbital will be the next standard that comes after that. And so we're very excited to have lots of participations, and Valerie's presentation earlier, it looks like we could certainly use a lot of their expertise in producing the orbital. Spaceflight participant safety and training and design of suborbital space vehicles is more of a systems engineering one with an orbital to follow. And we've just kicked off human factors in spaceflight vehicles as well. So we got a great work program, and people are moving forward with that. Next slide. So recent and upcoming meetings. So we had a meeting, I said to mention in person twice a year. April 8th, we had a meeting on the Friday after the Space Symposium in Colorado Springs. And during the meeting, we got to witness MLA's launch aboard the AX-1 mission. It happened right as we were starting our meeting, and that was very exciting. Very, very exciting to watch SpaceX and Axiom and NASA perform a wonderful launch. And we were very excited to watch our leader go into space and realize that the work that we're doing has got immediate application, and it's extremely important. And Mike's passion and engagement for standards, I think, is a great testament to the importance of the work that we're doing. So we're having an upcoming fall meeting. It's normally we would try to do it in Washington, D.C. around the CSF board meeting when lots of people are in the same place. And so when we get a final date on that, we'll publish it. Just a sampling of the ongoing week-to-week work. Next week, there are, well, there's actually a couple, three that I didn't put on because I didn't have room on the slide, but on May 9th, our software verification Tiger team is meeting. That's a group who's trying to rapidly pull together a base core standard. It's got experts from Blue Origin, from NASA, from FAA, and another number of other companies, SpaceX, and that's very exciting work. I listen in on that one quite a bit, and I'm learning so much. It's pretty amazing what people are going through developing that standard. We have a crew safety meeting on May 11th at 3 p.m. Eastern, which will be discussing the draft standard that's coming to vote soon. We have an executive committee meeting on the 12th at 11 a.m. And we have a liaison subcommittee meeting where we will have the ALPA president, Captain Joe DePete, talk to us, and we'll give a brief update similar to this presentation to the participants in that activity. So there's always an ASTM F47 activity going on every week. So if you want to participate, we would welcome it and encourage it, or just send us some comments about what you think we need to be doing. So next slide. And this is a little picture from our standards from space. So like I said earlier, Mike LA led an ASTM F47 executive committee meeting from space on April 14th at 12:30 GMT. And it was quite a production, lots of training, did a great job. We're very excited. And it generated a lot of interest. I think we had quite a number of new memberships. Oscar could attest to that. And I'm now finished with my presentation. There's about 5 minutes left, I guess, for questions and answers. So thank you very much. Oh, and next slide has our contact details if you'd like to reach us, including the ASTM DC points of contact. Matthew Pizzella in particular is very engaged with our committee and our Washington coordination. So, and I mentioned Kat, who's on the phone, and we all know Mike LA, and there are my details. So.
Any questions for COMSTAC members online? Thank you, Andrew. Really appreciate that presentation.
It's my pleasure. And again, I'll put the invitation out there. If anyone would like to get involved, we would welcome your engagement. I see a number of names on the screen of people who've participated in some form or another in one of our meetings, and we would actively encourage everyone to come and help us make great standards. Thank you.
Next up, we're going to go into the working group reports. First up is the regulatory working group, and Clay Maury will present tasks and discussion points.
Thank you, Charity. Nice to be here. My presentations are not as fancy as Andrew's, but you did a very nice job. Set a high bar, I think, with all the graphics. I think I need a graphics team working on our stuff here for the regulatory working group. So I'm Chair Clay Maury, Chair of the regulatory working group. We have two tasks in front of us today to review, task number 2 and task number 5. I will start with task number 2. I think we have a slide deck that can be put up. I want to thank particularly Ann Zukowski and Jared Stout, who worked diligently on this effort. Our working group basically went out and canvassed all the stakeholder communities that were involved on this issue of calculating maximum probable loss. We talked with the space insurance community, both underwriters and brokers, with impacted folks that are in the launch services community, also with stratospheric high altitude platforms that were out there. We tried to cast a broad net to make sure that we had input from everyone that would be impacted by this calculation. The task itself is that the FAA request was to review and recommend improvements and changes to Part 440, and specifically recommend language on thresholds used to determine the maximum probable loss, or MPL, the cost of casualty, and what alternatives to insurance would industry recommend for operators. It was a lively discussion and debate in the various forums that we held. And most recently, a couple of weeks ago, we got everyone online and Zoom to talk about this issue. So next slide, please. So what we have today, by the way, is these are recommendations. We would like to send out, there's a draft white paper that has been authored, and we've had input from all across the industry on this. We're going to circulate that out broadly to the COMSTAC, to the broader COMSTAC for review. And our recommendation here at the end would be that the next COMSTAC meeting this fall would be voting to approve this. But we think, given the breadth of the stakeholder community and review of this, that we've done a thorough review. We just didn't have the time and wherewithal to circulate it before this meeting to get everyone to buy off on it. But we've, and by the way, thank you also to CSF and AIA that also provided some input and context and encourage their members to comment on this. So to start here, and I can read all the bullets on all these slides. There's several here, so it's a little bit lengthy, but most probable loss calculations should not and cannot be based on the likelihood of damage or casualties, but must include the federal government's assurance to the public and to the licensee that regulatory requirements and compliance with regulatory requirements protect against the likelihood of damage or casualties. So, and the second one is increased transparency around the process for determining MPLs so that insurance providers can better understand the process for calculating them. And this was something we heard as a recurring theme, which is it's a bit of a black box out there. And we're talking particularly with the insurance community, but also with the stakeholder community, that nobody really knows how the calculation is made today. So it's hard to recommend how to improve that when we don't know exactly what is underpinning that calculation. Is there, you know, and again, a number of folks on this community, in this community, are talking with people that are actuaries, right, in the insurance community that are professionals doing these types of calculations, which are fairly specific in terms of the risk and what that looks like. And so we'd like to figure out, and maybe there's a group that could be put together with the FAA folks that do these calculations with experts from the insurance community that are experts in the mathematics of this, and talk about what that algorithm looks like, or the numbers behind it. And so what you see here in the bullets below is kind of who performs this calculation work, how often are the inputs revised or adjusted, what cost of casualty is used, why, how has social inflation been accounted for, how have increases in labor and materials, particularly in the past 2 years, been accounted for, increased utilization, higher value of facilities, new launch pads, processing buildings, and then new launch vehicles, materials, and how these vehicles are operated, carbon fiber structures, methane, green propellants. There was a discussion yesterday with respect to, TNT equivalents. And so there's certain elements that need to go back into this. It's probably in some cases vehicle specific with respect to if you're looking at propellant. In other words, you can't cast a broad net across different propellant classes, different capabilities. And so we'd like to figure out what goes into those. This is obviously fairly complex, depending on the type of system you're operating, the fuel, where you're operating it from, what the facilities look like, right? So all of these need to be incorporated, and how lessons learned been incorporated into the models after accidents and incidents in the past. So again, fairly complex set of requirements there, or I should say recommendations there, but we really need a bigger dialogue and opening a transparent exchange, particularly with the insurance community, but also with the folks that are operating these systems to be involved in that. Next slide, please. So the FAA should be in contact with third-party entities with a strong and credible background and risk assessment to evaluate the appropriateness of the current 1 in 10 million threshold, to ensure the federal government is not exposed to greater costs than intended, and that the launch companies themselves are not required to purchase more insurance coverage than necessary. So this is trying to gauge where that is, and this is for the Commercial Space Launch Act language. Prior to a formal rulemaking, the thresholds, the FAA should consult with industry stakeholders. We talked a little bit about this, as required with the evaluation of MPL calculations in section 102. Assess the insurance market. So there's a fair amount of discussion too with respect to capacity in the underwriting marketplace. And we were having this discussion yesterday with now the breadth of launches taking place. Now it's a huge increase in the number of launches with very valuable payload sets on top of that. There's a broader discussion here with respect to the capacity of the insurance market as it exists today. What's the federal government's role in providing insurance and indemnification? Where can the commercial market step in? Most of that insurance is generated out of the aviation underwriting pool. And maybe there's other ways we can address capacity issues so that it doesn't constrain the growth of the commercial launch industry, and that these calculations go to kind of the heart of that in terms of how much coverage you have and what does it bring to bear. Make a formal notice of inquiry or public consultation to examine potential changes to this. So this is important to be able to brief Congress and the stakeholder community in Congress so they understand what they would be signing up to here with respect to risk sharing. Where's the government's role, which I think when we've looked at this in the past, there really haven't been any major accidents claims and things, but we want to understand what that looks like. And then, of course, I think it was raised before, we have private ranges, we have public ranges. Where does the assessment go with respect to that? So both launch and reentry sites, right, and how those impact that calculation. And then finally, a formal proposed notice of rulemaking, and that we think that the 1 in 100,000 threshold for government property is appropriate after assessing that. Next slide. FAA should work with similar regulatory agencies that produce risk calculations. So there may be others out there, Department of Energy or others that do similar types of calculations. Maybe there could be some interagency work here just to make sure we understand what the best practices are from a federal government standpoint. I'm not sure, we didn't know the scope of who those agencies would be, but there's clearly some that must be out there that deal with hazardous, dangerous materials and other things where it can cause risk of casualty. The FAA should investigate utilization of a MPL calculation that takes into account casualties as well as potential for bodily injury and evaluate potential risks and costs associated with bodily injury instead of total casualty calculations. So I think that can be right from the insurance community on that one. Next slide, please. When pursuing a formal rulemaking on the cost of casualty calculation, the FAA should consider in its evaluation prior to the formal rulemaking the following. So consulting with industry stakeholders again, and this was mentioned on the earlier slide, a formal assessment of the insurance market for launch and reentry liability insurance and limits of liability and what the market can actually provide today, a formal notice of inquiry, public consultation, and then is this a duplicate slide? Sounds like the other one before. Anyhow, for negotiating with Congress and then the formal notice of rulemaking. This is it's the same one. Sorry. Next slide, please. That's it. Okay. So again, I'd like to thank Ann and Jared for authoring the paper. We're happy to distribute that out to the broader COMSTAC for recommendation. I would say that the last meeting that we had on this last Monday, there was kind of broad consensus within the stakeholder community. We were expecting maybe a more spirited debate. It was actually relatively everyone was in agreement kind of what the approach was. But Jim, I think the result here is that we need a better understanding of the calculation as it exists today. And then so what we're proposing now, just as a regulatory working group, is kind of open up that dialogue and process with the stakeholder community subgroup. And then, and by the way, we can approve this, I think, at the next COMSTAC meeting. But in between there, I think there's time to actually start these without formal approval of full contact. We can actually start that dialogue between the FAA and stakeholder community. So I think that's what we would like to start with this.
Just to emphasize that point, because I've raised it, we're going through this right now, and our challenge is when we ask second and third level questions about the MPL calculation, we get the answer, this is proprietary, we can't tell you. So we don't have insight into how it's done, which informs not just insurance, but also informs how we design our spacecraft in terms of risks and things like that. And so that's the real challenge we're having with this right now.
I don't know if there's anyone online from the insurance underwriting community. And by the way, I appreciate help from Chris Kutstatter on that point, former COMSTAC member, Ray Duffy, and some of the other folks in the Marsh community that were really active, engaged in the process. But if there's anyone online that would like to comment or speak on that, I'd be happy to have the insurance community give their perspective if they're on. Or Ann, I see that Ann's on. I don't know if Ann was able to speak or want to talk about the white paper specifically.
No, thanks, Clay. I thought you did a great job summarizing where we're at and kind of the input so far. So nothing to add.
Sorry if I talk too fast. I'm from New York, so move through those slides a pace.
Hey, Clay, just
Sure.
You commented that you were expecting a little more spirited debate, but I mean, we're completely supportive of what you guys are doing. It all makes sense. What was the thing that made you think it was going to be a little more spirited?
Well, we didn't know if the let's see. How do I?
Almost got through.
How do I place it? So I think what sometimes what you see in these areas is where you have kind of new entrants versus the folks that are operating today who know how the system works. They're comfortable with it. They operate within that community and know. And sometimes when the new guys come in and they're a little more concerned about how do they gain traction, make sure they understand and have the capacity in the marketplace.
Fair enough.
We also didn't quite frankly know with the high altitude guys, what the stratospheric platforms, how they would play within this. But I think there was broad consensus among the group, which was nice to see. And again, thanks to Ann and Jared for the hard work on the white paper.
I think like Steve said, right, there are secondary and tertiary effects here, right, where it goes into design and then certainly for high capacity passenger transport, right, is personal insurance for them and all that stuff. It just flows right in. So that transparency is huge.
Yep, absolutely.
There's a question that came in online that's maybe I should spin it more as a comment as part of the recommendation back to FAA for suggestion. So the question was, for MPL calculations, has COMSTAC talked with Air Force Safety Center because they have to calculate MPL for KC-46 and KC-130? So this may be something to just add to the recommendations.
But also assume, participants in this human spaceflight endeavor will want to know what's behind.
Exactly.
They're interested, folks interested in what goes behind, not just launch,
Yeah,
the insurance and that the commitment to safety as well. So.
And I think that's where the very first point you made is really important too, right? That the calculation can't just be the risk. It has to be the risk plus the control.
Plus the control.
Exactly.
Okay, so that was task number 2. I have a slide deck for task number 5 as well. If that could be put up on the screen. Okay, so given that not all Part 450 streamlining of launch and reentry licensing requirements advisory circulars have been completed, what is the recommended priority for completion? Also, are there others that should be developed to assist the industry in compliance with Part 450? So next slide. Basically, this is racking and stacking priorities. So here are the proposed advisory circulars, or ACs, as they're known. Scope of license, control of hazard areas, tracking, malfunction trajectory analysis, physical containment as a hazard control strategy, applying for FAA determination on policy or payload reviews, population exposure, collision avoidance analysis, toxic hazards analysis and thresholds, pre-application process, airspace and waterborne vessel hazard areas, probability of failure, distance focusing, overpressure risk analysis, hybrid launch systems, safety critical systems, and flight safety analysis. So this was the proposed ACs. Next slide. So this is an order of priority that we received back. So starting with scope of license, and then probability of failure, then flight safety analysis, I think levels of rigor, distance focusing, overpressure risk analysis, safety critical systems. And I won't read them all, but you can see all the way up to 16. Gives the FAA a place to start. Absolutely. Yep. Okay, and again, we reached out broadly with respect to working with CSF, AIA, and others within the regulatory working group community to make sure that we had a full and thorough vetting of this with industry folks. But please present it to the full COMSTAC here and to the online community to see if there's anything else. I'm happy to have their inputs. Is there a final slide? There might be one more here. Additional recommendations. Advisory circular is needed to identify how legacy operators, those who have licenses under 417, 431, can smoothly and easily transition to Part 450. So there was some concern expressed out there with respect to that. Vehicles are already, working now, verified, and have flown humans under a license. So hopefully there's minimal work here that's needed to transition to Part 450. And then some new operators may find it challenging to operate under a new rule without fully understanding all the ACs, and therefore they're less sensitive in order to priority and more interested in seeing all advisory circulars completed. Hopefully that makes sense. Any comments or?
We are going to be asking for a vote on this task, so folks do want to have a discussion in advance.
It's not necessarily, it is about the order of priority, but also the timing here. Are there chunks of timing, like 6 months, we really need to get these 5 out, and then the next?
I don't think we got into that when we were asking for this to give a time frame to the folks, but I would imagine on the first 3, 4 that would be the urgency, and hopefully that would be done within the next 6 months. I would expect the first 4 are probably the highest priority that were identified across the board. And knowing that 16 items is a hard thing to tackle in one shot. I think the first 4 is 25% of that may be doable.
I think you talked about this yesterday, but what is the plan to get? What is the current timeframe to get through the list, regardless of priority?
We are projecting 8 this year. We did 10 last year, 8 this year, knowing that, hey, there's going to be some revisions. So instead of saying, hey, we'll do 10, which actually ends up being, 13 or 14, so okay, we'll cut down to 8 this year with some revisions. We've got, I think, 2 or 3 already the feedback for the revisions based on industry input, which is great. And let me do a side plug there. With every AC that's out there, there's a comment form at the end. You can send in comments. We greatly appreciate those. And that's industry availability to comment on ACs. It doesn't have to be during a specific window or the first 3 months it's out there. It's at any time that anybody sees anything with those ACs, hey, this would be better, or this is wrong, or here's how to improve. Please turn those in, and we'll turn those revisions as quickly as we can. And then after this year's 8, we'll follow up next year with 8, probably, or 6 to 8, depending on that revision and the rulemaking activities that we're on. So that's why this is critical to kind of get industries. Okay, here's a priority list, because yeah, we can't get the 16 this year. So those top ones to get to this year, and then start prioritizing for next year as well.
I don't think it seems to be part of a recommended vote, but something that maybe we consider is that this is an item we sort of keep on the agenda. Not the,
Sure.
So because I could see that as you make progress, I think it'd be good for the COMSTAC to regularly comment on this priority list, as well as if there's edits needed on existing ones that might suddenly become a hot priority. So I don't think it needs to be part of any vote, but it's something we want to think about as future tasks.
Yeah, and one of the things that I will look for in the future is maybe not, here's your list of tasks, come back at the next meeting, but hey, here's some of the things we want to talk about at that COMSTAC, and it'll be a little easier as we start being more in person. We're going to do that this afternoon with some standards questions. Let's discuss this, and doesn't necessarily have to be a vote and all that, but providing that recommendation and feedback to the FAA is exactly what we need. And I like the idea of keeping this as a kind of an ongoing, hey, where are we with the ACs? AST can brief, and then you can provide that feedback. Perfect.
Thanks.
So Clay will never be finished.
Right.
No, we'll just get a lot more done. We'll keep doing more.
Whoever shares the regulatory working group will never be finished.
I just want to echo great work from the regulatory working group on both of these taskers. Looking forward to putting the first one to bed of the MPL 440, but this is a great, first blush to give to the FAA of, all right, here's your marching orders for those ACs, and we'll certainly update those in the future. So just last minute, any discussion before we call to vote for the order priority for the ACs? I'll ask Karina to do roll.
Okay, one quick thing. So I'm going to go in order around the room first, and then for the folks online, I'll call your names in alphabetical order by last name. But just a quick request for Leslie or Janice, or who might have access to this. We have a couple of COMSTAC members that are listed as attendees, and I don't know whether they can unmute as an attendee. Chris Hassler and Bolton are both in the attendee list versus the panelist list. So I'm not sure if I call on those two, if they'll be able to verbally vote.
We elevate them to,
if they have to do it.
Yes. Leslie, if you're listening, could you elevate those two, please? And for those two members, if you will note on your screen, there should be something that comes up that says promote the panelist. If you'll click on that, okay, it's on, and Chris Hassler's on.
Great.
All right.
Thank you so much. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so we're voting on Regulatory Working Group Task 5. Paul Danfus, we'll start with you.
Aye.
Great. Bill?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Aye.
Greg?
Aye.
Okay, Steve?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Kate?
Aye.
All right, folks online, General Bolton?
Aye.
Mary Lynn?
Aye.
Chris Hassler? Chris, if you're speaking, you might be muted.
I'm trying to unmute. How about that?
We can hear you now.
Okay, aye.
Great, thank you. Dale Nash.
Aye.
Sharon Pinkerton, are you on? Robbie?
Aye.
Eric Sommer?
Aye.
Anne?
Aye.
All right, and I vote yes. Charity?
I vote aye.
Great, thank you so much. Oh, Clay, I missed you. You're on the top of my list.
I hope so.
Yeah, no.
I just assumed I voted aye.
Excellent, thanks everyone so much. It's probably going to be 20 minutes or so before lunch arrives. Charity, do you want to move on to safety?
Yeah, I'd recommend if you're ready and willing. Move on to the safety.
Is that ready or willing?
All right, we'll try to go quickly. Maybe we'll wrap our day up a little later, so that's exciting. Somebody gonna pop the slides up there for us?
Have some slides here.
Actually, I apologize. There was a question that came through that I missed. Jim can probably answer this. Will this tasker on Part 440 be expanded beyond MPL and casualty costs? So maybe for the next go around.
There will be an aerospace rulemaking committee, a SPARC, established for 440. So this task, I don't foresee this increasing. I think we'll take this as good input to get that SPARC started, and good insight into building that charter on what that SPARC needs to do and how it needs to get there. So I don't foresee this being expanded beyond what the current task is.
Do we have safety working group slides?
All right, well, excellent. I will try to talk like I'm from New York and get us to lunch on time. First of all, I want to thank everybody on the safety working group for their 2 years of support. It's been a pleasure to chair this, and in particular, I want to thank my co-chair, Robbie Spathier. She's been fantastic. We also had a number of people that stepped up to help us from outside the group. I'd like to thank Lisa Locks. I'd like to thank Craig Pritzky, who are both in the room, and Jane Kenny, who helped quite a bit. I also want to note that since these issues extended broadly in industry, we did reach out to some industry folks, and we got good feedback, in particular from SpaceX and Boeing and Blue Origin. So I thank them all for that. The task that we were given here was, first of all, recommendation on the top 5 priority areas for human regulation, future regulation of human spaceflight, referencing the 2014 recommended best practices as a starting point. Honestly, I kind of thought these should have been 2 separate task areas, but nonetheless, we then came to advice on expanding the recommended practices to include the following items: flight longer than 2 weeks, flights beyond LEO, rendezvous and docking, radiation hazards, planetary protection, government astronauts, and spaceflight participants flying on board autonomous vehicles. And we were specifically asked whether there should be different recommended practices to apply to suborbital versus orbital flights, and if so, initial recommendations on what those topics might be. Next slide. First of all, we wanted to address the priorities, and we have pretty good consensus on this. We believe that a permanent regulatory environment that should specify the scope of informed consent, and to the maximum extent possible, it should incorporate performance-based rather than prescriptive standards. We think continuing with informed consent under a regulatory environment is a very important topic. We want to consider the current anticipated body of voluntary industry consensus standards to inform future regulations and serve as means of compliance. Specific examples, medical qualifications for the spaceflight participant, safety, emergency training, restraints, cabin environments. As we heard from the ASTM folks, there's a good body of work out there. We want to utilize industry provided input, including the 2021 recommendations for human spaceflight regulation and the 2014 best practices documents. We'd like to address the integration of occupant and public safety, including priorities when conflict arises. And, I want to note, I've made some comments about risk aversion negatively impacting the industry. The industry and government has been completely committed to public safety, and that has been something that has been done well. So any of my comments refer to the ability of the operators themselves and their informed spaceflight participants to make risk judgments. Building a regulatory framework that considers applicability to dovetailing with future orbital transportation and orbiting platform requirements at the point the regulatory authority by whichever agency is established for on-orbit activities. FAA should work with other governmental agencies and industry to establish a roadmap for future on-orbit regulatory authority. And we want to be clear here that we don't think that that has been firmly established, although SPD3, as I mentioned, pointed in a certain direction, and the current administration's budget request should suggest that that we might see more of this over in Commerce than we have here, but that's not our position to say. Next slide. So given that, the COMSTAC found that several of these topics were of interest to industry and appropriate for the United States government to address. However, we felt they were clearly outside the current regulatory authority of the Department of Transportation and FAA, and therefore not appropriate for the COMSTAC to address them in detail at this time. We feel that FAA wishes to pursue these, they need to get guidance from the White House and Congress. So specifically, this included flights longer than 2 weeks, flights beyond LEO, rendezvous and docking, and planetary protection. The COMSTAC finds that the topic government astronauts is of interest in terms of liability, but we recommended deferring the development of this recommended practices until the upcoming Part 440 Space Rulemaking Committee is made. I want to make a private observation of just my opinion here, that I thought there was some scope overreach here, going off into orbit and going so far as to bring in planetary protection. And we're at a point where the office has a very busy schedule with licensing and permitting of actual spaceflight that's happening within their mandated purview of launch and reentry. And I think that they should be focusing on that and focusing on getting environmental reviews done in a timely manner before they start thinking about planetary protection. End of personal comment. Next slide. Though COMSTAC recommends against pursuing efforts exclusively related to on-orbit activities, guidance in this topic would be helpful for launch or entry. There's of course a lot of overlap. For instance, solar flares can affect avionics and aerodynamic forces. We've seen this recently with the launch of Starlink satellites that encountered a problem there. I presume, and we don't presume to be medical experts, but that we ought to be concerned about launching even suborbital flights into a solar flare that due to radiation issues that might affect the systems or the occupants. So that seems valid. COMSTAC supports FAA efforts to examine public and occupational health limits on short-term and lifetime radiation exposure and consider guidance on space weather constraints and design mitigations to ensure human safety. Again, if we're making multiple flights, this might be an issue. Next slide. Pardon me. Excuse me a moment. Okay, so we had a long discussion on the issue of spaceflight participants on autonomous vehicles. We believe FAA developing guidance on this topic, particularly since autonomous vehicles are already in commercial operation with more development is important. Is this water?
Yeah.
Thank you, Clay. It's me trying to be from New York.
It's hard.
It's just a
hard to be
natural.
from New York.
COMSTAC
You
knows
guys just fight through anything. That's a courageous performance there, but take a break.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll be more laid back in California. That won't happen. COMSTAC notes that autonomous human spaceflight vehicles are already safely under operation under FAA license, and that they don't currently require onboard crew for the safety of the spaceflight participants or the uninvolved public. Results of a comprehensive safety analysis that incorporates the extent of vehicle autonomy as well as human factors could be utilized to consider additional mitigations. For example, if a spaceflight participant is required to interact with space safety systems, a non-pilot crew member or specifically trained spaceflight participant may be prudent and could be supplied by the operator, a contractor, or a company. And by that, we mean that the operator could provide their own crew members to do that or contract somebody to do that, or a spaceflight participant customer could be trained to perform the role. COMSTAC recognizes that guidance on this topic might consider variations in systems architecture, operational concept, mission links, and flight environments. Because we're in a nascent environment, these systems all look very different, and they have unique operating and mission parameters that need to be taken into account. And someday we may get to an architectural standard like you have an aircraft where most people don't even know what brand aircraft they're walking onto, and everything looks and feels the same, but that's not the world we're in today. On the example of the spaceflight participants being trained, there was an analogy made that the aircraft passengers are now currently trained or informed of how to operate the emergency exit system if they're sitting in the emergency exit row should that become necessary. Next slide. The COMSTAC acknowledges that there's differences in commonalities between suborbital and orbital vehicles and missions. In cases where practices are largely applicable to both, we would have separate documents to be advised. Additional industry input and deliberation is needed to develop specific examples and rationale for common and separate practices. So one more slide, I think. So with that, I guess questions and discussions.
Greg, just back on that orbital suborbital, there might have been a typo there. I think what we were saying is where they're common, similar documents, but where they're separate documents. As you were reading it, I was like, I think we wrote that backwards.
We all looked at it 10 times and didn't see it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I started noting that.
I think that's great. Are we, what is that? What is the action? Are we voting on all those recommendations? Is that the action?
I'm just asking for discussion.
Okay. Well, but is that where we're headed? I mean, I'm trying to understand. Is that the next step? Is that what would the COMSTAC be adopting the set of recommendations you outlined? Is that the plan?
We're not asking.
Okay. Well, the one comment I'll make is there's a bullet in there about authorities and talking to White House and Congress, which makes good sense. I would suggest that we do a may not versus I don't know fully whether we've fully examined the limit of FAA existing authorities for some of those sub bullets, and I think just a bit of a qualifier there may be useful pending whatever those discussions are with the White House and Congress. Again, if we're not adopting, that's if we're adopting this as a formal set of findings.
We should just FAA clarify that before we are asked to make a recommendation.
So I have here for vote that we would vote on the 5 priorities for future human spaceflight. So I just want to separate those two.
Sorry, so the first slide, we want to go back to that. Can we go back to the first safety working group slide? It's the second one, the 5 priorities for future human spaceflight regulation.
Okay. This is what we're voting on today. The rest is discussion.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Would you like to go ahead and do this or continue the discussion?
Oh, well, let's continue the discussion.
Okay.
Great. I had a question. Where's the 2-week threshold come in? Talking about.
Yeah, that was on the tasker and good question. That seemed a little mysterious, but it seemed obvious to us that it wasn't relevant to suborbital or launch and reentry, so we did not address it.
Why 2 weeks?
In the 2014 recommended practices, that was one of the bounds. It was for flights less than 2 weeks. So the question for the update is whether or not we should expand that to flights longer than 2 weeks.
And Clay, I think the original basis was medical countermeasures, right? 2 weeks is about the break point.
2 weeks is your magic number.
Right.
Okay.
Sort of.
Sort of, kind of. Yeah, we were discussing, was it 10 days or 2 weeks and why and who set that number? I have no idea, but I was just curious where that comes from.
Yeah, it's an old NASA
countermeasure
thing.
Yeah.
And what is the scope
It's
of
like a space shuttle thing. It's probably coming out of the shuttle.
It's really coming out of shuttle and deconditioned crew for physically landing the vehicle.
Yeah.
And that threshold's about, I want to say it was around 20 days back in the day. 21 days.
In the 70s.
Yeah. And then there was flights beyond Leo. I mean, is that a lunar flight? Is that Mars? What the scope of that is
Right.
was not defined.
Okay.
The one for number one up there, right, was an attempt to kind of summarize that basically probably the spark is where this conversation will occur, right? But back to the, it's this chicken and the egg kind of discussion of, should we have regulations? I don't know, what are they going to look like? And we just keep going around and around and around. So that first recommendation is really an attempt to say, we've got to set that basis. Are we sticking with some form of informed consent? Are we sticking with performance-based requirements? Are we going to stick with means of a compliance using industry consensus standards? That we need to nail those down before we can actually go have a healthy debate about what they look like. I think at the last COMSTAC, it was stated, right, that the spark would where that debate would occur. And so I think we're just kind of re-emphasizing here that is a very important part of the kickoff.
Any comments online?
Hey, Greg, this is Robbie. I just wanted to make a comment for the entire COMSTAC and everyone online that this, obviously we're a very, very diverse industry, lots of perspectives. We don't all see eye to eye. We often don't see eye to eye. And I think even on the safety working group, we had a lot of back and forth, and we did, however, reach consensus. And so I think that this is, this was obviously a lot of work to come together, and is very telling of what we were able to bring forward. So just wanted to add that color to this slide.
Thank you. And I want to thank you again so much for that. It's been an absolute pleasure working with you, Robbie, for the last couple of years. And I appreciate everybody's input on that. The COMSTAC, I think, has been a beautiful example of industry and government working successfully together. And our working group underscored that.
Yeah, I agree, Greg. And if you can indulge me a minute, I wanted to also thank you. I was going to do it at the end, but thank you because I think we were great partners working through all of this together. It was a lot of work, I think, as everyone on the safety working group knows and is aware. And we definitely spent a lot of time going back and forth, debating and disagreeing and agreeing. It was painful at times, but I'm proud of the safety working group. We all remained respectful. And we did reach consensus, which I know was your goal, Greg, and you were always pushing for that. And so hats off to you, leading the safety working group. It was a great pleasure working with you. And just a quick thank you to Charity and Karina for leading us during COVID. I know that we presented some challenges at times. And then obviously thank you to the FAA for allowing Greg and I to take on this endeavor.
And I'm sorry you can't be here today, but
yeah, well, everyone in COVID world is getting better.
Excellent.
So Mike, did you have a concern about number one, or
No, number
seems to be working, right?
Yeah, it's working. Yeah, it's just, yeah.
Well, if there are no other questions, I'm happy to vote on the 5 priorities. Do we want to review these again, or is everybody clear on what our recommendations are?
I don't have a comment for this particularly, but for the scoped out activities that we're not voting on.
Yes.
Clearly, we want the FAA to focus on their primary mission, but there are a lot of orbital activities emerging and current that are in the interagency working groups kind of realm of things. And personally, I want the FAA to be informed when they sit down at the table to talk about rendezvous and docking, to talk about these kind of adjacent issues. So just want to say, there's no better group to inform the FAA than COMSTAC, who has a really diverse background and experience in not just the launch and reentry world, but all these other aspects of orbital activities.
And I think we all agree to that, and we're hoping the FAA will seek guidance on what their role is, but they should be involved in interagency discussions. This has to be an all-of-government solution, and they need to be informed on these topics.
Okay, if no other discussion here, let's go to vote for these 5 priorities.
And I failed to call for a motion and a second on the last vote. I apologize for that. Can we get a motion and a second on this one?
I'll move.
Thanks, Dale. Who's second? Bill? Mike?
Like second.
Perfect. All right, Clay.
Aye.
Okay, Paul?
Aye.
Let's go to Steve.
Aye.
Okay, Mike?
Aye.
Kate?
Aye.
And Greg?
Aye.
Okay, folks on the line. General Bolton? All right, we'll come back around. Mary Lynn?
Yes.
Chris Hassler?
Yes.
Dale Nash?
Aye.
Sharon Pinkerton? Robbie?
Yes.
Eric?
Aye.
Ann Sokolsky? Is that a yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Let's see, coming back to General Bolton, if you voted, we didn't hear you.
Can you hear me when I say aye?
I can hear you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And I vote yes. Charity?
I vote yes.
Great. Thank you so much.
Greg and Robbie, thank you so much for your leadership on the safety working group. Fantastic job done, and thanks to everyone on the safety working group.
Thank you. And look at that. We made lunch in time.
See, you did. Excellent.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will break for lunch until 12:30.
Yes.
12:30.